America is the country that started the AI race, and as President of the United States, I'm here today to declare that America is going to win it. When it comes to AI data centers, they are an order of magnitude more power-hungry than the data centers we are used to since the internet age after August 1st negotiations with both China and Canada remained deadlocked. Meanwhile, the new rounds of tariffs introduced by Mr. Trump directly clashed with America's surging demand for energy and minerals. The very foundations fueling ambitions in AI and high-tech manufacturing behind the sensational headlines lies a reality Mr. Trump can hardly ignore. The United States is heavily dependent on supplies from Canada in the race to lead in AI and semiconductor production. Losing this critical link would inflict far greater damage on the U.S. than on Canada. I think the biggest concern, and the one that the industry itself really needs to address, is the energy usage that is just huge. The industry and the energy producers have got to figure that out. They've got to find a better way of providing that energy. Trump's decision to impose new tariffs is colliding head-on with America's swelling energy demand, the very energy fueling AI data centers, and the ambition to bring the semiconductor industry back home. His plan to slap a 100% tariff on imported chips is meant to force corporations to build plants and pour capital directly into U.S. soil. Apple quickly pledged a $100 billion investment in a series of new projects, yet alongside these state-of-the-art factories and semiconductor production lines comes a daunting challenge. Electricity in Virginia, home to the world's largest data center market, Dominion Energy forecasts that power consumption could double within just 15 years. An AI data center campus can consume more than 1 gigawatt of electricity, a staggering figure comparable to a nuclear power plant. And Virginia is only a snapshot across the United States. From server clusters in Oregon to technology corridors in Texas, AI data centers are springing up at a rapid pace, all demanding constant reliable power layer. On top of that, the burden of rebuilding the semiconductor industry within America and the power grid will face immense strain. And when it comes to large-scale, stable, and dependable energy supply, Canada is the partner Washington can hardly afford to overlook.
So when I talk about being an energy superpower, I always say in both clean and conventional energies. So what does that mean? Yes, it does mean oil and gas. It means using oil, our oil and gas. It also means more exports without question.
Canada currently holds the position of being the #1 energy supplier to the United States. Trade data from 2024 shows that the U.S. imports between 3.8 and 4.3 million barrels of crude oil per day. From the north, natural gas flowing across the border averages about 8.5 billion cubic feet per day, up 7% from the previous year. In terms of electricity, total exports to the U.S. reached approximately 11.4 terawatt-hours, enough to power nearly 1 million American households. For an entire year, Canadian uranium exports accounted for about 27% of total U.S. imports, making Canada the largest source and supporting a significant portion of America's nuclear fleet. Beyond oil, gas, and electricity, Canada is also a vital partner in the supply chain for a range of critical minerals that the U.S. would struggle to replace in the short term.
We bring as interlocutors here all of the critical minerals of Ontario. So for example, nickel is something that comes from Ontario. It's high grade and it's not replaceable from other places in the world.
Refined nickel from Ontario has no domestic substitute in the United States for many critical sectors ranging from defense technology to rechargeable batteries. Meanwhile, germanium mine in British Columbia is a key material in the production of fiber optic cables, solar panels, and night vision equipment. The advanced metallurgical facility in Trail currently serves as the country's sole supplier of this resource. These are not products that can simply be shifted to another supplier without requiring years of adjustments across the entire supply chain. If these material flows were disrupted, the ripple effects would be felt almost immediately. Industrial zones, data centers, and semiconductor production lines would face higher costs and the risk of delays. The unique advantage Canada offers through geography, scale, and stability is something Washington would find extremely difficult to replicate anywhere else.
We can be an energy superpower. We have all the components in nuclear, in hydro, in potentially in carbon capture and storage, which is going to be one of the determinants of competitiveness.
Prime Minister Mark Carney has not rushed to sign any agreement. He is pursuing a strategy that keeps channels of dialogue open while firmly rejecting any terms that could undermine Canada's long-term interest. At the same time, he is accelerating investment in domestic energy and mineral extraction and processing, thereby enhancing Canada's strategic value in the eyes of partners beyond North America. Carney has made it clear Canada is ready to cooperate but is also fully capable of standing on its own. The message to Washington is blunt. Canadian resources are a shared asset, but they only carry weight when the relationship is built on respect. Without Canadian oil, gas, and minerals, U.S. industries would face higher costs, slower growth, and a heavier reliance on less reliable suppliers, a risky scenario for an administration that champions manufacturing revival and aspires to lead in AI. In this web of mutual dependence, Canada, in fact, holds the stronger leverage over America's stability. The question for Mr. Trump is whether sidelining Canada is truly worth the supposed gains he hopes to secure at the negotiating table. President Trump's sweeping global tariffs for more than 90 countries have come into effect from a blanket minimum of 10% up to a high of 50%, with some hefty levies on some of the United States' major trading partner. Let's control what we can control, not what Donald Trump dictates, but what we can control. On August 7th, the U.S. Customs and Border Protection officially began implementing a new round of import tariffs under President Donald Trump's executive order. The tariffs range from 10% to 50% and apply to more than 60 countries. Brazil was hit the hardest, with a 50% rate, while Switzerland faced a 39% levy. Several Asian countries, including Laos and Myanmar, were also subjected to a 40% tariff. The European Union, Japan, and South Korea, having reached agreements, temporarily remain at 15%, while the United Kingdom, after signing a separate deal, faces only 10% in parallel. Mr. Trump hinted at the possibility of imposing a 100% tariff on chips manufactured outside the United States, exempting only those companies that agree to open plants domestically. Apple quickly pledged a $100 billion investment in domestic projects. However, the plan to impose a special tariff on computer chips remains on the table and has not yet been formally enacted, and what it means is, for America, their U.S. levies on tariffs are now at the highest level for a century. President put out that post on social media, saying billions of dollars in tariffs are now flowing into the United States of America today. And according to a research center at Yale, the new tariffs could cost an average American family an extra $2,400 a year by the end of July. The U.S. Treasury had collected more than $150 billion from the tariffs currently in place. Economists point out that this burden first falls on American importers before being quickly passed on to consumers who end up paying more. June's CPI data showed clear price increases for many everyday items such as household goods, clothing, and furniture, and the impact is not limited to North America. This wave of tariffs is also being felt elsewhere. India faces the risk of its tariff on Russian oil imports being raised from 25% to as high as 50%, while South Africa has voiced concern over job losses as its export advantage erodes, forcing it to pivot towards more difficult markets in the Middle East, Asia, or even within Africa itself. For Ottawa, the message is unmistakable. As other countries rush to reorient their exports, Canada must also accelerate its diversification process. The evidence is already clear, with wheat and grains from Ontario finding their way to Europe, and the key is to remain steadfast on this path or already talking about the impact of tariffs. Cause President Trump hit Canada with an increase of 35% tariffs last Friday. Since August 1st, Canada has faced new pressure as the Trump administration raised tariffs to 35% on goods outside the scope of the USMCA. While more than 85% of two-way trade remains tariff-free, the targeted sectors are taking a significant hit. Softwood lumber continues to face high duties, while steel, aluminum, and many other manufactured products have also been met with new barriers. Some exporters have been forced to adapt quickly. Ontario, which serves both as a major grain production hub and a vast consumer market, imports a wide range of U.S. agricultural products and has long been a top customer for farmers in roughly 35 to 40 states. At the same time, the province exports its own domestically grown grains to international markets. Now, with the 35% tariff applied to goods outside the USMCA framework, many of Ontario's exports are being redirected away from the U.S. toward Europe. This shift may open opportunities for Canada to expand its markets, but it also means that American farmers risk losing one of their most stable and important customers if cross-border trade slows down. The Prime Minister was tight-lipped a day after saying he'd consider removing some counter-tariffs on American goods if it would help Canadian industries. Prime Minister Mark Carney convened a meeting in Ottawa with his cabinet and the provincial premiers to find a unified response for the country. His main message was clear: continued dialogue with Washington. avoid rushing into unfavorable agreements, and at the same time protect domestic industries from immediate risks. He also suggested that some retaliatory tariffs could be lifted if doing so brought tangible benefits to key sectors. However, the provinces do not all share the same view. Doug Ford of Ontario supports retaliatory measures and stressed that Trump should not be trusted. In contrast, Scott Moe of Saskatchewan leans toward easing or removing tariffs to reduce cost pressures on households and businesses. Trade experts recommend that Canada keep retaliatory tools as a bargaining chip but avoid escalating tensions beyond what is necessary. In the broader picture, Canada continues to place its hopes on major industrial projects. Volkswagen's $7 billion battery plant in St. Thomas is still progressing on schedule, despite an uncertain trade environment, yet in many other areas the situation is less favorable. Amherstburg's fire chief noted that 3,100 fire trucks ordered from the United States are facing delays and higher costs due to tariffs and component shortages. While the production timeline was already stretched to 3 years, the coming weeks will reveal whether Trump will indeed impose a 100% tariff on chips and how exemptions will be applied. Canada may have to adjust some of its retaliatory measures to shield vulnerable sectors while preserving leverage at the negotiating table south of the border. Rising prices risk spreading quickly, putting pressure on manufacturing sectors heavily reliant on imports. The tariffs Trump has implemented serve both as an economic tool and as a political signal for Carney. The greatest challenge is how to safeguard the domestic economy while keeping Canada's options open. The decisions taken now will determine whether the current deadlock worsens or gradually shifts into a new, yet fragile equilibrium, you say. And now he could suddenly all of a sudden open up the USMCA. What makes you think that?
Well, first of all, I start off every interview with saying how much we love Americans, how much we love the U.S., and as I've said on this show many times that a tariff on Canada is a tax on the American people.
Starting on August 1st, trade relations between Canada and the United States have entered a period of tension not seen in decades, with the new wave of global tariffs imposed by President Trump. Canada has become one of the countries bearing the heaviest impact across the entire country of Canada. Is probably closer to 20 million Americans rely on Canada for jobs, and vice versa. We rely on jobs with trade with the U.S., but it's just hurting both countries. Ontario. Premier Doug Ford was quick to issue a warning, speaking directly to an American audience on CNN. He stressed that Trump could tear up or restart the USMCA with a single signature well before its official review in 2026, according to Ford. The current tariffs are not only a blow to Canadian exporters, but in reality, a burden that lands squarely in the pockets of American consumers. He backed up his remarks with concrete evidence. U.S. manufacturing has lost more than 37,000 jobs since April, falling to its lowest level in 5 years, alongside an additional $6.2 billion in costs hitting the auto sector. Ford's decision to deliver this message through American media was not merely an act of defending Ontario's interests. The larger goal is to exert political pressure within the United States itself, where the economic consequences are already beginning to show. While Ford chose to confront Trump's tariff policy head-on before the public, Prime Minister Mark Carney has remained committed to a different course, one defined by cautious calculation and strategic patience.
Of course, the Prime Minister has to weigh all industries, not just the specific industries that are immediately impacted, but has the way industries against industries, has the way region against region, and the unity of the country. Well, I think it's been a very wise and a strategic, cohesive approach on behalf of all Canadians.
Prime Minister Mark Carney's response after August 1st was seen as notably cautious. Ottawa did not rush to launch a new package of retaliatory tariffs. Instead, Carney stressed the priority of maintaining dialogue with Washington and carefully weighing national interests on all fronts before making any decision. Carney's calculations rest on the fact that the bulk of Canada's trade remains protected under the USMCA. Data from the Royal Bank of Canada in June showed that as much as 92% of Canadian exports to the US are still not subject to tariffs. Only about 8%, mainly concentrated in steel, aluminum, and a few other sensitive products, face an average tariff of around 30%. Rather than making hasty concessions, Carney's team has set its sights on broadening market access elsewhere. Exports to the European Union have already posted double-digit growth. while trade with the United Kingdom is also on the rise. At the same time, senior Canadian ministers have traveled to Mexico to coordinate strategies aimed at preventing any scenario of division, a tactic many in Ottawa predict will be Trump's familiar approach in any renegotiation of the USMCA.
Yes, we're having discussions with the Americans. Prime Minister Carney wouldn't say when he'll next speak to U.S. President Donald Trump. But Ontario's premier didn't mince words.
What's the general impression of Trump in Canada? He's probably most disliked politician in the world in Canada.
Ford and Carney share the same goal of protecting Canada's economic strength, but their approaches could not be more different. Ford did not hesitate to state bluntly that Trump is the most disliked political figure in Canada, while focusing on highlighting the tariff costs being borne by the American public. Carney, by contrast, has remained composed, avoiding personal attacks and carefully choosing the timing of his interventions in order to gain the upper hand when entering negotiations. The combination of public pressure and quiet diplomacy has allowed Canada's response to remain consistent, while sending Washington a clear signal that Ottawa will not back down easily. The possibility of the USMCA being pushed to the brink of collapse ahead of schedule is very real, as Trump has already shown his willingness to break timelines if doing so gives him an advantage. Yet Canada still holds strong cards: essential minerals for U.S. industry, steady energy exports, and robust agricultural trade. At the same time, Trump is also facing domestic pressure from rising prices and job losses, factors that could force him to limit escalation for Canada. The challenge lies in standing firm, while keeping the door open to mutually beneficial solutions. Since August 1st, relations between Washington and Ottawa have resembled a test of endurance. Trump has wielded tariffs as a weapon of pressure. Carney has responded with patience and strategic calculation, and Ford has amplified his voice through U.S. media to increase pressure from within. How long both sides can sustain their positions, and the degree of political risk Trump is willing to bear, will determine whether this standoff ends with a balanced deal or with a rupture that could reshape North American trade sooner than expected.